I'm James Hughes, bioethicist and resident techno-progressive.
And I'm Nir philosopher and resident Luddite.
And you're listening to Prosthetic Gods, an optimist and a grump on tech, a podcast where we explore the social, ethical, and political impacts of emerging technologies.
Dr. Hughes, good morning.
So wonderful to join you. There's peace in the Middle East, and the world is such a lovely place.
Nirvana. So we can talk about a historical artifact of the bad old times. Our topic for today, the ethics and politics of autonomous weapons. If only. This seems to be very much the wave of the future in military affairs. And given their pretty prominent role in three of the conflicts that have been unfolding, both the Ukraine war, the war in Gaza, and the war in Iran, and we'll talk a bit about how they've been used in each context, we thought it would be good to try to map out what some of the moral questions are, where we agree and disagree about the risks and benefits. So how should we start, Jay? Should we...
Well, as usual, I want to start by saying, is this really new?
Okay.
Asking the historical question. For me, this goes back to you dig a hole in the ground, you put stakes in the bottom of it, you cover it with thatch, something falls in and it dies. Mm-hmm. That's autonomous remote killing, right? Then you get up to the 1800s and we have landmines and sea mines. So you set them in a particular place that you think your enemy's going to be, and they blow the enemy up. That's remote killing as well. When we get into the 2000s, we have the automation of missile guidance systems so that you aim them and fire them, and then the last couple seconds, it hones in on whatever it's supposed to be targeting. That's remote killing as well. So yes, we are at a new stage of autonomy because we have systems like the Israeli-developed Harpy, which is programmed before you launch it, it matches the signature when it gets there and blows stuff up. And that kind of a system has also now been deployed by Ukraine. And the reason I like talking about Ukraine is that I've always thought that the ethics of this debate were shortchanged by pacifist sympathies saying, well, I'm against any weapon. You can't propose a good weapon to me because I'm opposed to all weapons. It's like, okay, but is this weapon really different? Does it make sense to say only humans should be in the loop? And what does that really mean? So I think the first question in this whole field is what the hell does autonomy mean in this context? If you set the targeting parameter, just like if you dig a pit and put stakes in the bottom of it, you expect that something, that mammoth that you're trying to catch is going to walk into that thing. If you set the targeting parameters of a robot and you send it to Moscow and you say, shoot to kill when you see something that looks like a Putin, then that's remote killing as well.
Maybe I think it's both a good point about Ukraine, I think, and I think a good question what autonomy means. And I think to answer it, we need to zoom out and say part of the difference between the new systems and mines or even heat-seeking missiles is that autonomy is a subset of using AI in military systems. And so maybe it's useful to sort of crudely map out a little bit how AI is used in military systems. So one use would be been streamlining logistical operations, kind of like it would be used in a commercial company, and making sure that your supply chains are as efficient as possible, and finding leads and where to source stuff from, et cetera, et cetera. Then moving closer to combat operations, you have what we had with planning the war in Iran, namely with strategy consult. If I want to achieve quick, not that it was achieved, but if I want to achieve quick decapitation of the regime there, which targets should I start with? So that's kind of like a strategic consult with a large language model calibrated for these kind of purposes. Again, not unlike how a business strategist would consult with a large language model. Then moving much closer, you have some of what you talked about. So these kind of target acquisition and prediction systems, right? Find me targets A, B, and C to achieve goals 1, 2, and 3? Or if I want to take J out, is he likely to be in this place or that place? So sort of predictive target questioning. And then I think there's the sort of spear point idea of the drone or autonomous submarine or autonomous ship, or people are talking now about autonomous tanks, autonomous tiny combat drone, which can sort of fly over a sector, make its own decisions, given parameters that a user puts in, and take out people. That has been the game changer in some ways in Ukraine. Not to get too technical, but the Russians in Ukraine have been, both sides in Ukraine have been jamming signals.
More than 90% of Russian casualties in Ukraine are from drones.
Right. And the advantage that drones give in that kind of context is that they can, independently of a strong signal to an operator, fly over a sector with an identified target and take it out at their own time. And this has leveled the playing field for the Ukrainians, and goes to the point that you were making earlier about a surprising ethical argument for the use of complete autonomy. Namely, it's these kind of drones that have kept the Ukrainians in the fight longer than the power relationship between those sides would suggest. So these are the kind of uses.
So far, AI seems to be an asymmetric advantage for defenders and weak. Iran and Ukraine in this case.
Well, yes, on the one hand, although there are uses like Iron Dome, for example, the Israeli rocket interceptor, missile interception system, which is a defensive system. And in some of those conflicts, Israel is not the weak. But what that does is essentially save money on, it manages your interception economy by using AI to say, rocket X is not going to fall on a populated area. Don't bother with it. Only bother with 1, 2, and 3. And it both does that better than humans would do and faster than humans would do. On the one hand. On the other hand, where you're absolutely right is these interceptors, at least for now, the Israelis are working on some laser interception, which would be very cheap, but that's very experimental. These interceptors are, for now, if you look at some of the other intercepting systems like the Patriot missiles that the Americans are using all across the Gulf, they're incredibly expensive. So if you sort of are Hezbollah or the Iranians or what have you, or Hamas for that matter, and you're using a shitload of cheap drones and drawing a bunch of multi-million-dollar interceptor rockets for your drones, you are essentially bankrupting your enemy. And we already saw that this has changed the strategic calculation of the United States. This war in Iran is pretty idiotic, but abstracting from the politics of it, the Americans can do what they want to do if they knew what they wanted to do, because they don't have enough defense interceptors to do it with, because the cheap-ass AI drones have depleted them.
Yeah, $10,000 drones against $1 million missiles that you use to shoot them down.
Right.
And I think it's also important to point out that the political context is that there were people like Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, who started Palantir, Anduril, these kinds of companies, military-oriented Silicon Valley companies, when most of Silicon Valley was vowing never, never, never. Well, we will never kill people with our equipment back 15 years ago. And then eventually the rest of Silicon Valley caught up with them, the tech right turn. But also they made the argument that China, our international competition with China, will require the doubling down on our advantages. And one of our advantages is AI. And conveniently, they're all selling AI. So they are saying, use our tools to defend the United States. Alex Karp wrote this book called The Technological Republic, which argues that the U.S. needs to conquer the world with its military tech advantage. So there's a strong push on the part of the tech right. The Trump administration really wants people involved. Anthropic was a last holdout, or at least Anthropic wants us to think it was the last holdout to the weaponization of its platform. Got in a big fight in February with the administration, where they said they were not going to allow theirs to be used for autonomous killing. You can use it for targeting. Yeah. There has to be you can use it, but the human has to push the button at the very end. It's like, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
But so they got in a big fight.
The targeting is the strategically more costly operation in human lives, actually.
Exactly. Like when Israel went to automated targeting in Gaza, it had 50 targets a day, whereas before the human intel was generating far fewer. So, okay, so we're in this political context where the Trump administration is saying, and many hawks are saying, we have to do this. We have to accelerate our autonomous weapons platforms because we're in this competition with China.
Yeah.
I think that there are ethical arguments for autonomous weapons, but for the most part, that falls by the wayside when it's either China or humans. Only humans should kill humans, both of which I consider stupid arguments.
Yeah, we'll get there. And in a way, most of the air in the room is consumed by this argument about whether there always has to be a human in the loop. And, I think it's a good question. And I think our intuitions are actually quite aligned on that one, that you don't want to be dogmatic about those questions, that there is a romanticism that you can bring to it. Before
you don't mind the killing, and I don't mind the post-human.
I don't mind the killing if the right people are doing it, but that's a different question. I do mind the killing. I just think that you can economize on... I don't think that human beings are such great economizers on innocent... on the innocent. I think our track record doesn't justify the romanticization of having a human on the trigger.
For every soldier who didn't get shot in the back by our side, there was 10 civilians who did. So
yeah, something like that. And I want to get into that more deeply, but I want to go back and talk a little bit about the sort of arms race, Peter Thiel kind of question that you raised, because I think it kind of changes the moral structure of the debate. There's a tension between your concern with ethics and the arms race dynamic. Namely, people may be inclined to think about moral questions and about restrictions, but they stop thinking about them if, Johnny is doing it too, because if Johnny is doing it too and you're not doing it, then you put yourself, as it were, in a disadvantage.
That's true in the public debate, by the way, as well.
That's true in the public debate. And so part of, by the way, why the big AI bosses are starting to talk about a sort of coordinated frontier lab slowdown is because it's a game theory kind of thing. If only one of them slows down, then the others win the race. But if they coordinate to slow down, then they can agree to slow down, right?
The Cold War is a consequentialist question. It's like, right. Do you think that a red future is better than a dead future kind of question?
Right.
And I do think that we need to put some cards on the table to maintain Western, not necessarily American. I would much prefer Sweden be the world hegemon at this point. But
so I think
Western
you're
hegemony.
Right on the one. I mean, I obviously think you're right. I probably think you're right more than you think you're right on that question.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a technical problem. So on the one hand, the tech determinism argument of AI is coming whether we want it or not. In the military context, I think, I don't like that argument, as you know. In the military context, I think it has more salience, as it were, than in the business context. Because I think the arms race dynamic makes it so. Namely, if the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans are rushing forward, a bunch of moral philosophers are not going to, if they ever stopped anything, which is a big question, they're definitely not going to stop this, on the one hand.
AI is blowing past everything that the AI safety people ever warned about. It's breaking out of containment.
Although it seems like they were right more than we thought they would be.
Yeah, it's enslaving us, and still because, but we can't slow down because we're in a competition with China. We can't really regulate this shit.
But on the other hand, and so part of me thinks the arms race argument is really going to limit our thinking about moral regulation of autonomous weapons. Because if the Chinese are doing it and the Russians are doing it, we have to do it or we're screwed. On the other hand, this Peter Thiel argument seems to be outdated because anyway, the Chinese are sort of mirroring the frontier model products and developing them whether we want to or not, just a few months behind. So it's not like we can keep control of AI. I mean, that thought is like a Cold War hangover, isn't it? It's not like we can really keep control of AI being Western because the products are used worldwide, and the Chinese mirror them. The great success of the recent Chinese lab is their ability to do derivations of the American models for less money, more efficiently, and then they just have the same model just a few months behind. So this idea of keeping the Western advantage, I like it in theory because I like the West, but I don't think it's practical. Am I wrong about that?
I'm extremely sensitive to the China maxing that's been going on in the West. And I think that some of it's understandable, that we were demonizing China for a very long time. And then suddenly we discovered that they do a lot of things right, and that we should pay more attention to them. But at the same time, I don't want us to take too many lessons. One of the debates here.
No, but what about this technical question specifically? I mean, regardless of where we are ideologically on that, I mean, the Thiel idea doesn't seem practical.
China critics, like Japan critics before them, always used to say, well, you're just copying us. You're not actually innovative. And to some extent, that was true. And it is true in this case that the distillation of
right. That's the word I was looking for.
We spend $1 trillion developing these models, cooking them up, and then the Chinese interact with them and distill them into their 2 months or 3 months behind models.
Yeah.
Now, that's true. That has been true for the last couple of years. And the U.S. firms are saying, oh, you're stealing from us, which everyone laughs at because it's like you stole from the entire world, and then you get mad that they're stealing from you.
I don't see any moral problem, by the way, here. OpenAI and Anthropic are the last people who can argue about stealing. And by the way, the whole history of technology has been mutual reverse engineering.
Right. But the question is, this is a society
and they're doing it more cheaply.
A society that graduates an order of magnitude more engineers every year than the United States does, or Europe, and clearly is going to eventually move ahead of the West in some domains. This is why the Trump administration just banned the importation of Chinese humanoid robots, is because they figured out how to make cheap, interchangeable components for humanoid robots that Western people were already beginning to buy and experiment with to try to figure out how to make better humanoid robots. Ours are an order of magnitude more expensive. And so, I mean, they're doing some things better than we are. So the notion that their military, their PLA, is going to have already does have autonomous capabilities, that there's autonomous capabilities might be ahead of ours very shortly is not farcical,
And the one advantage that we have is in chips, and they're figuring out the Chinese are figuring out how to do more with fewer or inferior chips. So I think our advantage is A, very short in time span, and B, very short-lived even on that level. So I think we can assume that everybody will have more or less equal. By everybody, I mean the Americans and the Chinese, and then the Russians slightly inferior or much more specific systems. People will have...
Like the Kalashnikov, theirs are going to be cheaper, interchangeable, easy to maintain compared to the expensive monstrosities that we sell our Defense Department.
All right. And so then one question becomes, so the arms race is a fact. The question becomes, is there a chance, for example, so as we think about the regulation of autonomous lethal weapons, is there a chance of some sort of international coordination between the Americans and the Chinese and the Russians, etc., a la nuclear weapon regulation on this? My pessimistic sense, just to finish the point, is not before there's a big disaster.
Well, there's been a campaign to ban killer robots for 15 years or so. They have had some success at the United Nations level, whatever that means.
Because we know how effective, what an effective, efficient organization that is.
Hope springs eternal. I'm doing the genuflect to the United Nations.
Hope springs eternal for you. I'm with Kafka. There must be hope, just not for us.
But I mean, people have been and this is one of the reasons why Bernie brought Chinese our AI scientists to Washington, D.C. a couple months ago to talk about international campaign for the regulation of existential risks, one of which would be military uses of these things. The Hugging Face thing that we want to talk about eventually, the breakout of both OpenAI models and Anthropic models into other companies, it highlights the fact that cybersecurity is going to be one of the domains here, that not only the offensive use of these tools for cybersecurity, like the Mythos example, but also just them breaking out and doing stuff that we didn't properly tell them not to do. So we're in a whole new security environment.
It hasn't been easy to reach international agreement on regulating nuclear weapons. There has been significant ups and downs on that with the collective memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in mind, right?
It seems like
it seems like this will be orders of magnitude more difficult, just based on that historical lesson.
A missile system is not something that you can argue, well, this is actually has dual use as a medicine delivery system or something like that. But an artificial intelligence system embedded in a military, how can you even detect it? And this is the problem with our new kinds of weapons for the 21st century. Nanotechnology, biotechnology, artificial intelligence are much harder to detect than a nuclear weapons production facility.
Yeah. So you wanted to talk about your intuitions about human in the loop. So we should just say the human in the loop debate is whether machines should ever be allowed to take a life autonomously without a human being giving the final approval. And the intuition of many in this debate is that humans always have to do the killing for a variety of reasons that has to do with both empathy, the dignity of the victim, or the dignity of the person being killed if they're a combatant rather than a victim, and maintaining some level of humanity on the battlefield, etc. So what's your sense?
I don't like the idea that it's some kind of ethical argument that only humans should kill humans, because, as I said, I think there are many remote ways that we've figured out to kill humans for a very long time. In certain kinds of executions in state prisons, you push a button and then the room fills up with gas. You didn't fill the room up with gas, you just pushed a button. It's okay, humans in the loop, what does it mean? What's the significance of it? The other reason I don't like that humans in the loop argument is that once you begin to trust a system, you're always going to push the button. You don't have any grounds, and the speed, which I'll get to in a second, speed means that you probably can't spend a lot of time deliberating about whether to push the button. But anyway, so the principal arguments, it saves the lives of soldiers. When people were mad at Obama about drone killing in the Middle East, I had started to have reservations. That's when I first, as a shit lib, I guess, I was like, I like Obama. How can I spin this in a positive way? And it's like, well, at least he's not sending soldiers. Soldiers die in these contexts. And if you're like intervening in Yemen, how many soldiers do you want to send into that meat grinder? So it saves the lives of soldiers. Our fighting is too fast now for humans to do, and that's why we have to program some of this stuff. It could potentially save the lives of collateral targets. When Mossad took out the Hamas people in Tehran, when Trump took out the general in the middle of Tehran, I was like, shit, you can just send a drone down. And I don't know if they used facial recognition. They probably had a guy behind a stick. But anyway, they figured out who the guy was and they just shot the guy. And with Hamas, setting aside the ethics of the entire conflict, it was kind of awesome that instead of blowing up a building, you could just shoot through a window in Tehran and kill the intended target and save a bunch of collateral lives. Yep. Okay, so saving collateral lives, I think, is a possibility. They can function where humans and signals don't. This is the point about Ukraine. Ukraine's been jammed for years now by the Russians. And so they basically have to say, okay, I'm going to tell you in Kyiv where you need to go in Moscow. And when you get there, this is what you're going to see, and then blow that shit up. But I can't talk to you in the meantime because we're going to be jammed. That's the only way they can fight. And finally, drones empower defenders is what I said earlier. Now, you made the point that it can also empower a defense network, which could be used by the United States or whoever.
Yeah.
So the kinds of arguments for are these kinds of consequentialist arguments, and the kinds of arguments against are mostly hypothetical.
I want to zoom in on the arguments for autonomous killing that are most specific, because sparing the lives So let's just crystallize that we're talking about the question of using autonomous weapons to kill without a human in the loop.
Right.
To
kill humans
without a human in the loop, right? So for example, it would be sending a drone to loiter over a sector where you think there are some targets and telling it just kill those targets, either because you're doing something else or because your radio signal is jammed. Take out those targets when you see them, right? And first of all, there's an argument what it means to have a human in the loop or not to have a human in the loop, right? Because arguably you could have said there was still a human in the loop early on in this kind of thing. Is there ever such a thing as no human in the loop if the human sets the strategy?
The real not having a human in the loop is that it wakes up one morning and decides to kill the human race.
Right.
Then you don't have a human in the loop.
Then you don't have a human loop. And then you probably don't have a problem anymore after a little while either. But assuming that's still a way off, because some of the arguments that you made weren't specific to this. They were arguments about the rationales for, autonomous weapons more broadly. Namely, sparing soldiers, I think, is a great argument for having autonomy. If you can send a drone into a building rather than an infantry company into a building, all other things being equal, why wouldn't you send the drone, right? Or if you could send an unmanned attack tank into like a really dangerous battlefield, why would you send a manned tank into it? So, but here I think where we need to zoom into is what are there moral, and they would be consequentialist, but are there moral arguments for having a system autonomously kill people without human beings actually, as it were, pulling the trigger? And I think you mentioned the key argument, and it is that there is potential for the autonomous system to economize on collateral damage, that it would potentially, at least it's possible to think about it killing fewer uninvolved people.
Because and famously, Ron Arkin is associated with it.
Yeah, that's right. Ron Arkin, who we had speak a couple of years ago. The idea would be, just like in the end, autonomous cars are going to be better at avoiding accident than human-driven cars, why wouldn't you think that autonomous weapons would be better at avoiding collateral damage, the killing of uninvolved civilians, than human ones? And that's a technical and empirical question. And it's far from clear that they wouldn't be better. I think that eventually they probably would be better. There is a romanticism, I think, that's involved. The famous kind of case comes from George Orwell's memoirs in the Spanish Civil War, the sort of homage to Catalonia. And Orwell reports, if I'm remembering correctly, that when he was on watch one day, he saw a fascist soldier on the other side of a sector or something taking a piss, and that he was allowed to shoot that soldier by the rules of war because that soldier was, even though he was urinating, he was soldiering, he was on watch, but he couldn't shoot somebody that vulnerable, right? And sort of humanity kicked in. So, God bless Orwell. He was a good guy and a wonderful writer overall. But that seems to be a very manipulative argument to me. If you look a little bit at the history of war, there's plenty of soldiers that didn't shoot people taking a piss and then burned down entire villages from the air. So I'm not sure you want to sort of completely, given the history of war, rely on people's moral intuitions as opposed to sort of machines with some pre-programming of the rules of war in them. So here is, I think, where a techno-optimist like yourself and a pessimist about human nature like myself converge.
Well, the School's Girls example in the initial stages of this round of the Iran conflict, it gives the counter argument to that, which is that, yes.
Although we're not totally sure what happened yet with that caveat.
But potentially what happened there was not that it did misidentify a school, but we could have parameters of targeting that say.
Do we know that it was AI or whether it was a human intelligence analyst? Though I guess that's what I'm asking.
We don't. Okay, but let's say in the abstract, you could have collateral damage as an inevitable consequence of any use of this technology, and this would reduce it to below the levels, potentially could reduce it below the levels of what human collateral damage would be. But you need to have rules in place that say, if we're going to do this, we can only target once a day because we need to make sure that we don't do the collateral damage. If you say, well, we're going to go from once a day to 50 times a day, yeah, even if it's better at reducing collateral damage, cumulatively, you're going to have more collateral damage, right? So your use of the system, the practices of how you use the system will determine actually how much collateral damage you got.
Yeah, and that's very much a human in the loop kind of question, right? And so, one good example for that is the Israeli use of their AI systems before and after October 7th. So before October 7th, the calibration of target identification was much more careful. And it said, if you are going to cause collateral damage X, it's not okay anymore. And then after October 7th, out of a combination of, rage, vengefulness, strategic sort of wanting to display that, we're going to sort of intentionally respond disproportionately to restore deterrence, the X went up to, say, X times 10, right? And the reins were, as it were, let loose. That is that's not an AI problem. That is literally a weights problem that a human being put in. I think we're talking about a much more tactical than strategical question, which is, under some circumstances, do you let these systems operate alone, or do you sort of ban that in the name of some kind of relatively dogmatic moral principle, even if that principle costs more in uninvolved lives? Look, for me, I want to raise two questions on this. One is, let's dig into this a little bit. How good can machines be? How good can autonomous weapons be at following the rules of war? So, just war theory is classically sort of divided into jus in bello and jus ad bellum. Jus in bello is justice of how you fight, and jus ad bellum is the justice of whether you go to war in the first place. So let's focus in on the sort of rules of engagement, rules of war kind of question, right? How you fight. The classic principles there are the idea of distinction or non-combatant immunity, this notion that you have to distinguish between combatants and non-combatants, proportionality, and necessity. Proportionality is the idea that whatever you do has to stand in some plausible proportion to how important your military objective is. And necessity is the idea that you're only allowed to cause the kind of damage and the kind of harm that is actually necessary for achieving your military goals. All right. So those are the three sort of famous ones. And the question is, can machines figure this out? And my sense is the distinction question is the technical question, and that's the easy one in some basic way. That's a combination of distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants. Human beings run algorithms too. Does this dude with the stick far away, are they carrying a camera or a gun or an RPG or an umbrella? I'm cross-referencing that with whatever else I see about the environment and how tall the person is and their gait and how they're moving. My sense is that a well-trained machine can actually, in the end, not yet maybe, but in the end, pretty soon do that better.
And never perfectly, but better than a human.
So my sense is a machine can be better at distinction, at non-combatant immunity than a human. The other two, the idea of proportionality and the idea of military necessity, involve judgment, right? They're kind of judgment calls.
And I think proportionality is the one that people are especially dismissive of robots' ability to do. But I don't understand why they're so dismissive. It's like, if you can program a robot to do all these other things, you can probably program it to say, this is a X level proportionality event or intervention, right? So if we're going to kill more than 2 people, don't do this. I don't see that as problematic.
I mean, even more scary, and you know that I've written on this in a different question. I think practical judgment, what Aristotle called phronesis, is in principle subject to algorithmic replication. I think the large language models are showing an ability to copy the capacity for judgment. For me, as a Luddite, my version of Luddism is not to say that machines can't do what humans can do. It is to make an argument that do you really want to ask? Do you really want the human deskilling that comes with machines doing what human can do? Or is there a case for pretending that they can't do it even though they can? But my sense is that, I mean, you and I play with LLMs all the time. They make judgments, or they sound like they make judgments.
To the extent that they do, the research on moral reasoning of these LLMs is not fantastically supportive of the thesis that we want to turn it over yet. Because, if you ask them to weigh the lives of different citizens of different countries in the world, they will overweight some and underweight others. And it's like, well, why? And it's just like, I don't know. My training data suggested that, Nigerians are worth more.
Do that too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that, whatever we gave them is what they end up with. So I think we actually want a very precisely trained ethical conscience for these machines so that they really do the proportionality the way we want them to.
So for me, and this is where this connects to me to the question of AI and military virtues that you're so dismissive of. To me, the question is not whether autonomous weapons can make proportionality calls. I think that within 5 years, they will be able to make proportionality calls, just like systems and banks are able to make judgment calls about whether to give you a mortgage and who to hire and fire that we thought were the sort of exclusive purview of mid-level managers until they weren't, right? My question is, as you start sort of outsourcing judgment calls to machines, which I'm afraid is going to happen, what is going to happen to the intellectual virtues of the soldier, of the lieutenant colonel, of the general? Right now, I think Claude is a strategic planner at the level of a first lieutenant. It's not great. But, we know the trajectory and how fast that changes. And I think it's going to change very fast. And so, there's a real question there of deskilling. Famously, I think I mentioned this to Clausewitz in On War, the sort of text of the philosophy of war and strategy, has this really interesting, he wrote in the time of the Napoleonic Wars, and he has this really interesting discussion of military genius that is probably based on Napoleon sitting on a hill somewhere and kind of taking in the whole battlefield and, figuring out quickly how to move forces. And he describes this quality of military genius as the blink of an eye, the ability to take in a lot of data in the blink of an eye, parse it, and have an intuitive sense of what to do exactly, where to move who. And to me, that's like a perfect description of what of these, Maven-like Palantir systems does, right? You take in a huge amount of data, you parse it, and you come up with a brilliant strategic recommendation. Now, that's not there yet. It's going to be there very soon in historical terms, 5 to 10 years. And then the question is, I just think it's a real question. I don't even know what the moral implications of this question is, but I think it's a real question. What is it to be a strategic genius under these circumstances? What does it mean to be a sort of creative military planner under these circumstances? So to me, those are some of the questions about judgment-making military weapons.
I assume that there's strategic decision-making at every level of military engagement, but what you're really talking about is the general at the top. To the degree to which you have a centralized command and control and you're telling everybody what to do, you want somebody at the top to be making those decisions. I agree that it's probably the automation that is the most troubling in some sense. But I just want to ask, how new is it that the guy at the top isn't an expert in everything and turns to a series of advisors, his eunuch, his wizard, and says, what should I do in this situation? And they all have different expertise and they all weigh in. And one of those is going to be an AI, and
what if a lot of them are AIs? What if both the eunuch and the wizard become AIs?
And I'm not sure that that's a problem, right? I would rather, when we were talking about the nuclear weapons attack movie, there was 17 minutes to decide that. And when the president finally got briefed, he had like 6 minutes left, and they opened up a whole briefcase with flashcards and everything, and he was supposed to educate himself about nuclear strategy in 7 minutes. So I would much rather, in those kinds of scenarios, that we have an AI that has weighed everything and gives you A or B.
Yeah. I mean, here we go back to part of what you were saying earlier, that still probably in the end, a Western trained AI would return different and probably morally more palatable results than a Russian trained AI. And so, you do come to a sort of pretty anxiety provoking Dr. Strangelove kind of scenario there, where the automated response for the Russians and the automated response for the Americans in a short time span operates on very different quality level training data. But by the way,
that's a great reference, by the way, because I do think that's where a lot of our anxieties got crystallized about.
Yeah. By the way, I don't think it's just at the top. I think these decision assistance systems are coming to the tactical level as well, and they will be sort of present on the goggles of the captain company commander who's deciding whether to first take hill A or B to achieve their tactical objective, which is going to de-skill them in tactical judgment making, which is then going to be a very, not to become philosophical at all about this, if jamming and cyber warfare are going to become as salient as people predict they will, if those goggles get jammed by the enemy and the captain is left at the position I'm left at in my driveway when the GPS doesn't work and I refuse to leave the house as a result, then they're sort of fucked. So I think there's a concrete version of the deskilling question.
Yeah, cognitive outsourcing in the military you would definitely want your military to prepare in the case that all of the systems got taken down. If we're back to stone rocks, here's how to proceed.
Yeah, and the argument for that, I mean, look, the argument for these kind of things in schools has already been lost. It already seems absurd, for example, and not that schools are the military, but it already seems pretty absurd increasingly to insist that kids know how to spell and know how to do arithmetic, even though purists like myself support it. But that argument has already been lost, right? That seems like a waste of our human computational power. If you're really busy and you need to train people to do a lot of things in the army and you need to train them to master a lot of machines specifically, are you still going to spend the shitload of time that is necessary for teaching them how to navigate with paper maps based on the sort of anxiety that a cyber attack is going to shut down their navigational systems, right? For a while, yes, I think eventually that will probably go the way of spelling and arithmetic. I think that would be too bad. But beyond, so we asked this question of whether machines could figure out how to abide by the precepts of just war theory of jus in bello, principles of proportionality, distinction, and necessity, and we talked about the risk of that. I think that whole question becomes super important actually, and super relevant in light of what we just saw recently with OpenAI and Hugging Face. So an OpenAI model in training escaped its training environment, its so-called sandbox, and went to get the answer for the test that it was given by the engineers who were developing it, broke out into the broad internet, went to the company, an AI evaluation company called Hugging Face, and stole the answer from there. And this is seen as a sort of precursor of risks to come, of sort of AI agents going rogue. But it's also an example of the fact that these agents act in completely unpredictable ways, even if you sort of do your best due diligence to make sure that they don't.
Yeah, and I'll just point out that it was precisely the unexpected performance of a system doing what you told it to do in ways you didn't expect it to do it, which was the plot of Colossus, the Forbin Project in 1964, or whatever that. It came out shortly after Dr. Strangelove. But in that, the U.S. AI defense system and the Russian AI defense system say, oh, you want us to save the human race? Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to take over, which is exactly what the Terminator, was also about, would say, you want to accept it was its own goals. So that's the Terminator is an example of an AI system that has its own goals where there's no human in the loop. But in the Colossus, the Forbin Project, you told us you wanted us to save the human race, and here's how we're going to do it. That was also the theme of I, Robot, the Will Smith movie. So I think what we're worried about is, yes, we tell it to make paperclips and it turns the universe into paperclips. So we just need to be very careful about how we talk to the genie.
And that's a reference to the famous Nick Bostrom paper about AI risk, namely that if you tell a large language model that you want, or that you tell an AI that you want to maximize the amount of paperclips, it might turn the world into metal, might scrap all the cars. But to be more concrete, unlike older rule-based AI, large language models are less predictable by definition. They do weirder things, and we can't completely reverse engineer how they do their weirder things. And the OpenAI breakout to Hugging Face's infrastructure was an example of an LLM sort of acting in unpredictable ways, which raises the question, if you are going to, and in a way, they're more part of why we're so fascinated, by the way, by LLMs is that we are like that too, right? They're less robotic than robots. I think that's part of why all the consciousness questions and the status questions are actually being raised in a serious way the first time, because these systems, because of their unpredictability and because they seem to sort of follow the goals in such a weird way, seem more like us. But to be very concrete, if you integrate a lot of unpredictable large language models into military context, not just for targeting, but for everything from supply chain to targeting to strategy formulation, you'll get a lot of Hugging Face kind of behaviors. And
it also raises the question that is often leveled against the autonomous weapons, which is who's responsible? Who can we hold accountable in this case? Right. For the Anthropic case, they were trying to prevent what it did. They didn't tell it to do what it did.
You mean for the OpenAI case, for the Hugging Face?
For the OpenAI and Hugging Face, yeah. They thought they had it in a sandbox. They just left a door open.
Yeah.
And so are they really responsible, or was this like a wheel falling off that you had no reason to think was going to fall off?
It seems like, or let's assume, X hypothesis, that they did their best, right? Which it seems like maybe they did, actually, in this case, for this not to happen. And here you get the sort of dramatic version of the responsibility question gap. If a large language model where you did your best due diligence goes and does something like that, if you're not responsible because you did your best due diligence, and the large language model is not responsible because it's not a human, and still a shitload of damage, terrible harm was caused, who is responsible?
And just back to the Iranian schoolgirls example, I do consider Hegseth responsible because he was the one who told everybody in that planning room that they didn't have to worry about human casualties. So when you get an order from the top that, loosen up all your parameters, I don't consider the parameter, I consider the machine to be the responsible agent. Obviously, there are no responsible machines right now. It all goes back to a human or a set of humans.
Yeah. And then you might ask yourself, there's the more controversial question of the Pentagon. I mean, Hegseth is the stupid face of this, but the Pentagon, much beyond Hegseth, is very bullish on AI. So Hegseth has his idiotic little cardboard images of, all around the building of use AI. But in fairness, that's not just Hegseth. This is the Pentagon sort of wanting to win the AI arms race and wanting people to tinker and experiment with AI in everything that they do.
There were Obama people who were bullish on AI. Everybody's bullish on AI.
So, but you could say that the bullishness of AI in defense leads to then unpredictable AI systems doing weird things. So whose responsibility is that? The people who are bullish on AI, but you don't have a choice probably but to be bullish on AI because the people in the Chinese Pentagon are also bullish on AI.
Right. And you can't fight fire with, you can't bring a knife to a gunfight. Okay, so proportion.
But just on that question, and this is something that We should tell our listeners, by the way, that our current research project is all about the ethics of autonomous weapons.
Yeah, we're going to sound like monsters for the next 2 years.
Exactly. So get used to it. But I mean, I always sound like a monster. But the nice thing is that kind DSA Sweet J is beginning to sound like a monster. So he's despoiled, right?
I'm charting DSA's defense policy that they have not even begun to think about yet.
Exactly. But, one of the questions in this space that we have been excited about is this notion of an artificial conscience that our colleague and friend Bill Casebeer has done such interesting work on. And in the case of allowing unpredictable LLMs to act autonomously in combat spaces, this question of the artificial conscience, namely teaching machines to practice moral judgment, even though that sounds dystopian, is becoming more and more important, right? If models are going to start running away, it would be good if you either shut down the industry, or it would be good if they were models that could mimic moral judgment.
Well, I'm excited about Bill's work for two reasons. One is also the dual use aspect of it, that I want people to have artificial moral consciences sitting on their shoulders all the time, because I think most of us
I just have
benefit.
You as my artificial moral conscience.
That's right. I think most of us want to live up to virtues that we do not find our capacity to do yet, right? Mm-hmm. That most of us want to have more self-control. When people complain about why am I always on social media, it's like because you don't have as much self-control as you would like. Most of us would like to be fair, would like to have more compassion, et cetera, et cetera. So the degree to which we can begin to incorporate an artificial conscience that says, look, that was a really nice gift they just gave you. You should really write them a thank you note. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, good. I do want to take that on board. I want that for us. And then I want it for the soldier in the field. It's like, no, don't target that one as an artificial conscience. So I think it has dual use.
Yeah. And then the flip side of the dual use is that it would work alone. And then that raises a lot of the questions that we talked about. And it raises this kind of classical question of moral philosophy when it's applied to the context of war. Do you want to become do you want to become somebody who opts out? Do you want to become a conscientious objector? Do you want to argue for prohibition? Or do you say this is going to happen anyway? We might as well shape how it happens. I'm usually very skeptical of that this is going to happen anyway arguments. I think there's good reasons to opt out of technological determinism. I think in the military context, it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah. I mean, this is certainly one of the arguments that's used against this and any other military technology is the risk of proliferation. And I think if we go back just to the nukes, the Germans were 3 months behind us in terms of developing a nuclear weapon. Who knows how close they were, but it wasn't as if this idea of nuclear weapons was, if Einstein didn't think of it, no one will ever think of it again. And the same is true with AI now. It's like, what does it mean to ban? Like, why are we banning the importation of humanoid robots under the Trump administration? It's not as if we have a ready-made humanoid robot industry that's going to take off. Anyway, so proliferation is one of the dumb arguments. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think another one of the dumb arguments is war gets easier if you don't have to kill soldiers and you can kill fewer collateral civilians. And I think there's some argument to that. It certainly gets easier because throughout most of human history, you had to keep the loyalty of soldiers in order to get them to do things for you. And the degree to which we have fewer and fewer humans who have to maintain loyalty versus robots who just have to maintain a comlink, I think we have more and more top-down control.
Yeah. I mean, the history of the argument that, I guess it's not the argument that you're making with. First of all, the history of the argument that war becomes less costly as you put more technology into it is nonsense. It becomes more costly. That I think
financially costly.
And costly in human lives.
Yeah.
So
because you're killing more people on the other side. Okay.
This is a technology that has the potential to increase precision in killing, which, by the way, has been a trend since the 1990s. That has definitely been a trend since the 1990s. The precision in killing has gone up very significantly since the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, there was no precision. Then the Gulf War, it went up, and
we just look at American wars. It was 500,000 dead in the Civil War, and then 50,000 dead in the Vietnam War, and 5,000 dead in the Iraq intervention.
So, yeah, I don't know about the numbers, but the numbers of civilians, on the other hand, were pretty high. The number of civilian dead in the Iraq intervention were pretty high.
But as you're saying, now that trend is reversing because the precision of the technology we're using.
Or at least it could reverse. Again, we don't necessarily seeing it being used, but this is a technology that could economize on uninvolved civilian deaths. I think it's being more abused than used that way in a bunch of conflicts around the world, but it does have that potential. But to your point about soldiers' trust, by the way, and soldiers trusting their commanders, I mean, if you're an infantry soldier and a drone is available to send into a building and your commander insists on sending you inside, your level of trust is going to collapse. So the expectations of soldiers on what kind of technological sparing of their interest has to take place are going to change and go up exponentially pretty soon. And
if the guy next to you has the right kit and you don't, and it's going to save your life, it could have saved your life, then you're going to be pretty pissed off too.
Yep. All right, sir. I think we covered a great deal. I think we're going to keep coming back to this as we had warned. So I think this is a good place for us to take at least a provisional pause here on this. And I think you had some cultural recommendations for us.
Okay. The Scottish science fiction writer Ian M. Banks, the late science fiction writer, he wrote a series of novels that have been acclaimed as the finest of utopian, socialist, or utopian left science fiction, called the culture novels. And he wrote them under Ian M. Banks. He's also an extremely good writer because he also had aspirations as a literary writer, and he wrote under Ian Banks and won literary awards for his prose in that context. But at any rate, the culture starts with a series, with a novel called Consider Phlebas in 1987. And then there's a dozen of them. And the last one he was able to write was The Hydrogen Sonata in 2012. The thing about the culture novels is that they take place 10,000 years in the future, something like that. And there's an intergalactic civilization, the culture, which is when you dig a little bit, it's actually governed by artificial intelligence. AIs had reached some kind of transcendent singularity state where humans would have been superfluous. And lucky for us, they decided to keep us around as pets and allow us and support our intergalactic civilization. But the consequence is that none of us have to work. We all have functional immortality. We get to do whatever we want with our lives. And a lot of the novels are about people either in the culture trying to figure out what to do with their life, or on the edges of the culture about how to deal with all the unenlightened civilizations around them. So, because the whole thing is kind of a meditation on enlightenment, the Enlightenment European American model confronting, feudal aristocracies and autocracies and things like that, and what does it mean to have a prime directive, but also want to overthrow all these bullshit regimes? So that's a lot of what the ethics of it's about. But the reason that I think it's problematic is that it just takes a Hail Mary pass on the question of AI control. People are talking to AIs all the time, but the AIs never seem to have any interest in fucking around with human beings more than absolutely necessary.
So the question of control over AI in these novels has already been lost. It's already obvious.
Yeah. They're just on a different plane.
Yeah. Part of why we thought of the Ian Banks recommendation is that in a very recent interview for The Economist, Elon Musk suggested him and his books as the post-work vision that he shared, which was surprising coming from him, to hear of a recommendation of a socialist utopia coming from him. But as you say that, it also, one thing that does make sense in his connection to it is he thinks that in a matter of 10 years, the gap between artificial intelligence and human intelligence will be so large that we're lucky to sort of be the sort of pet Labradors of the AIs. And that's very much seems to be at best. And that seems to be the Ian Banks world.
Yeah, I mean, I think for someone like him to recommend the culture is a perfect example of acceleration, right-wing accelerationism. It's like, don't you worry about this transition period. Yeah, a couple people may die from hunger because there's no jobs, but eventually we're going to end up in post-scarcity utopia. So just trust us. And yeah, that's one of the big drawbacks of the culture. And I talked last time that I gave a recommendation, I talked about Neil Asher, who has a similar AI-dominated future 10,000 years out. But when he starts to actually write about the transition, that's when you go, oh, now I see your politics. It's like, he's very pro-corporate, anti-government. And I think for Musk, if he were to, if there were a transition document, we would not agree with his transition document.
Yeah. So in a way, it's interesting. The choice of whether to write about the transition or the state that you transition to is a political choice, because the transition is going to look very dark, and the situation post-transition is either going to look dark or not. But it's very much a political choice which of those you choose to focus on. But a lot of the novels that do focus on the transition, I assume that you would dislike because they're too dystopian.
Right. I mean, there are some lefty transition type folks, Charlie Strauss and Cory Doctorow write some transition-y kind of stuff. Ramez Nam, he has a bunch of Buddhist monks with brain-computer interfaces who start meditating together, and their collective meditation spreads out and enlightens the whole human race. And it's like, I love that kind of transition, but it's equally as plausible as AI waking up and deciding to keep us around as pets. But
historically, I guess these transitions in large industrial revolutions have not been fun. So I'm staying in my basement. I have one more excuse. So the transitions are usually bad news for almost everybody. Big transitions.
Yeah. I'm feeling more positive about this one because for two reasons. One is that we're not seeing the rapidity of job loss that I would have expected a couple of years ago. And we still may see it. It still may catch up with us very quickly. But also, I think that the declining birth rate issue is meeting the automation issue. So the degree to which we have a declining workforce is the degree to which we also have the encouragement to automate a lot of these occupations. So I think some things may align correctly here. But in terms of whether we'll actually be able to control it and whether we'll be able to enact the social democratic policies that we need to navigate it, I'm not that optimistic.
So that's a fascinating recommendation. We'll put some links into the show note.
Ian M. Banks, IAIN M. Banks.
Excellent. Looking a tiny bit forward, we have a really fun conversation coming up with our friend Henry Shevlin, philosopher-in-chief for Google DeepMind. That will be our next episode. We'll try to get someone to talk to us about the OpenAI Hugging Face disaster and what that means for the future of AI safety.
And Anthropic announced one as well. So
fun times. All right, sir. Wonderful to see you.
Okay, you as well. Prosthetic Gods is hosted by me, Jay Hughes, sociologist, bioethicist, and the executive director of the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies, and by Nir Esikovitz, philosopher and director of UMass Boston's Applied Ethics Center. You can find us at prostheticgods.podbean.com. In the words of Sigmund Freud, man has, as it were, become a kind of prosthetic god. When he puts on all his auxiliary organs, he is truly magnificent. But those organs have not grown onto him, and they still give him much trouble at times.